Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this, welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that is hopefully for somebody. My name is Cal Naranya, and on episode 126, I am going to be reviewing Skeleton Crew's first season. I guess we'll find out. As this is a full season review, it is going to be spoiler filled, so if you haven't watched the show yet, no need to worry, timecodes will be listed in the description. But if you want to hang around for the end of the episode, I think it might be worth listening to. Because we've had a number of live-action Disney Plus shows all about Star Wars, I thought it would be fun to rank them on a tier list. So my tier ranking is going to be S, A, B, C, D, and F, and I'm going to be ranking as a whole each of the Disney Plus Star Wars shows. So that will be end of the episode, and then we are going to wrap up with listener mail and responses to Question of the Week. Now let's jump into Skeleton Crew Season 1, question mark?
If you finish a section early, we'll decide the next section to begin. Any questions?
What if, say, someone missed their tram, so they're taking a shortcut
Sit down, student. The test will begin shortly. Sit.
Now, we are all aware of what likely John Watts went into Lucasfilm for the pitch for this show, and it was Goonies, Star Wars. And that might sound weird to some people, but if you've not kept up with the previous expanded universe or even the animated shows, which if you've still not watched Star Wars Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, I mean, you could skip Resistance, or Bad Batch, as I know you've heard me talk about, because I did review the first 2 episodes. I mean, it wouldn't be classified as a review, but initial impressions with Rob Keyes about a month ago. And pirates in Star Wars are not that abnormal. Now, if you're thinking more about swashbuckling pirates, that would technically be more in the fantasy genre, but Star Wars isn't science fiction. It's always been science fantasy. So an element of piracy is not abnormal. Scoundrels and whatnot, they fit in with the model of this universe. So the pitch for this, really interesting. Unfortunately, my initial impressions from the first 2 episodes kind of hold still for this show, which is we have 8 episodes, roughly 35 to 40 minutes runtime. However, that's still about 5 minutes of credits with each episode. So we maybe have 4 hours of storytelling in this 8 episode runtime. And that does hurt the show. I love the idea for this. The concept in the marketing was really fun. I like taking genres or even storytelling frameworks that we're used to and then spinning it with a familiar franchise or even just going into a franchise we are familiar with a new take. It's some of the reasons I love filmmakers like Phil Lord and Chris Miller, taking stuff we are so familiar with but giving their interpretation. And they've been quite successful with that. Go back to something like the Lego Movie or the Jump Street films. That's a success. The irony, of course, if you are a longtime fan of Star Wars, they were going to make a movie, but I don't want to talk about Solo, a Star Wars story, any more than I have to. This show wants to so desperately be an Amblin film, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, whether that come down to Disney Plus wanting to lower production costs, which their budgets have ballooned out with a lot of these properties, specifically Star Wars and Marvel. And we are introduced to our 4 main characters of KB, Fern, Wim, and Neil. And outside of 1 episode that really focuses on KB, the iconography or distinct characters that we have are very surface level, and that's the most frustrating part for me about this show. I don't go into Star Wars content, and I hate calling it that, but that is what I'm going to call it. My approach to new Star Wars is always of optimism. I want to love the show because I love Star Wars. In its origin, and a lot of people like to ignore this fact, and Star Wars in general, the fandom, unfortunately, there is a very loud minority of a horrible culture that hates on you for liking particular parts of Star Wars. That's not what I want to do here. I went in with optimism. If you saw my trailer reacts for this show, I thought the tone was perfect and that 80s fun and joy, and Amblin's a word, it's going to get used all the time, but it really captures that coming of age tale that we have grown up with if you're specifically a millennial or a young Gen X. unfortunately, the characters were introduced, their archetypes are as essentially as far as we get with their character arcs in this show. I am really disappointed by that because the pitch for this, as I said already, Goonies, that's an interesting one. You're giving us something that would likely work significantly well with children. And there's been a conversation that I've seen around this show, which is you need to be a child to enjoy that. And film realists, specifically, obviously me, Kyle Naranya, will always stand up for really well-made content, theatrical films, television series for children that don't dumb down their ideas, but they make them accessible for all ages. Some of the most fundamental kids' entertainment, heavy quotations, that I've grown up with, I still will enjoy to this day, looking at a lot of the films from the Disney Renaissance period. Star Wars as an example, which allowed you to grow up, particularly with the jump from Star Wars A New Hope into Star Wars Empire Strikes Back. That was a significantly more mature film, and retrospectively, the critical reception to Empire has become more positive than Star Wars. Obviously, A New Hope is always going to be beloved. And it's an interesting conversation that is around the making of Star Wars content now. I'm not going to get into production because this is not either side of what's going on with Kathleen Kennedy. More specifically, interestingly enough, it's John Watts, who, if you're not familiar with his work, his most popular work is definitely the Spider-Man trilogy with Tom Holland. And I see a lot of the problems that I had with those films in this television series, which is really interesting pitches and cool ideas that ultimately the depth to which they are explored is a lot more shallow than I would have hoped. And that, again, that's not saying this needs to be super complicated and Andor for children. Andor is an incredible show, but it specifically is looking at the political nature of the rebellion leading into Star Wars A New Hope. This show, of course, being after Return of the Jedi, because this is the one era that Disney seems to want to explore more specifically with all of their plus shows outside of Andor and a couple others. But we get these characters, and the journey that they start off with, we get to know them so little that being invested in their character and their journey, I found that investment really difficult. And because of the dialogue that they do share with each other, and it being minimal because of the length of these episodes, I find this show to be riding that fine line of it's good, but the potential to be so great is there. I said in an earlier episode, Star Wars The Skeleton Crew really would have worked better as an animated show that would have substantially reduced the budget, but it also would have allowed for probably longer episodes. You can put these characters that are children in more intense circumstances because you're not having to film with actual kids. Now, they get around a lot of that by using the volume, but let's do some positives, which is I appreciate what we do get from the show, particularly the use of real sets. We go to a number of places, but that also fits in with what doesn't work about the show for me, which is the minimal journey they go on, which is just returning to their home of At-Aten, it being this ancient treasure planet, pun intended, I guess, because of course Disney made Treasure Planet, an underrated animated feature in my opinion. But Treasure Planet, ironically, is kind of what Skeleton Crew should have been. If we're going to take from Goonies, then why not bring in elements of Treasure Island? The concept of these kids working with a Long John Silver, for lack of a better description, with Jude Law's Jod Na Nawud, say that name 5 times fast, as this horrible pirate captain, a mystery that's completely unnecessary, that is just revealed at the end of the second episode. Spoilers, I guess, but you know that this whole review is going to be about spoilers. Introducing a pirate captain who we know is a despicable human being, but following him around, having to begrudgingly work with these children to achieve his ultimate goal. In this instance, we should know it's At-Aten. This is the place he's been looking for his whole life. But it sort of just falls into his lap, where the mythology of this world is barely explored. It's not something where this is an ancient place that people have been trying to get to forever. Well, it turns out one guy has been, but that's revealed to us by episode 4, or I believe it's episode 4, where we learn about, yes, we do. It is, no, episode 5. And each of the episodes doesn't feel as if, one, it's part of a larger story. The main plot, obviously, is getting the kids home. But exploring the pirate side of this universe, we're introduced to Jude Law's crew in the first episode, and then he is cast aside. There's a mutiny with a werewolf pirate. Incredible practical effects. I love seeing monster suits in Star Wars. It's one of my favorites. But we don't even get to spend enough time with his crew to really feel how despicable they are, for the tension to be building up with the fact that they're chasing these kids because he escapes with the help of them, that they should feel as if they're on their heels the whole time. And the inconsistency of the tension pushing the plot forward and them to feel on nerve or the edge of their seat. We've got to get home. We've got to get home. It sort of just feels methodical, and the divergence of where they go doesn't feel like it's part of this grand treasure hunt to return home. It just sort of feels like these events are happening one after the other. Similarly to, ironically, another Disney property, at least with an adaptation, that being of Jungle Book. The original animated film was actually a collection of short stories that they jammed together into a final film, or into a feature film. And outside of a couple episodes, the revelation of where they need to go next sort of just compounds where, oh, we need to go here. Oh, we need to go here. There's no map. We only find the location is somewhere, and then we've got to go somewhere else. The framework and the construction of this season-long story doesn't seem to have been figured out from the get-go, which I find especially interesting because all of the episodes outside of 2 are written by Christopher Ford and John Watts, which makes no sense to me, where my questions that I think of leading into this review were about the production for this show. We've known for a long time with Disney Plus, specifically with Marvel and Star Wars, they did not approach the production of a television show the same that it had been done for broadcast television or even cable for such a long time, which is having a showrunner, a show Bible, coming up with the whole season arc, and then coming up with individual stories that would serve that larger story, but at the same time, be accessible enough that people didn't necessarily have to watch week to week. Eric Kripke, who I'm a huge fan of course created Supernatural and is the showrunner on The Boys, has done a really interesting, it is interesting. He's done a really great interview talking about what the expectations were when you were working in broadcast standards or broadcast television, and how that's been lost with streaming. Skeleton Crew really does suffer from those problems where if they were writing these as they were making them, that problem that I'm having becomes abundantly clear, where we're not really sure what the journey the kids are going to go on for. And that's more frustrating because by the end of this journey they go on, all of the main kids sort of feel underdeveloped. We have Wim and Fern going back and forth, with both wanting to be the leader. Wim being this meek kid who loves the mythology of the Jedi and wants to be one, maybe. Is he Force sensitive? No. We do get a funny instance of him using a lightsaber, which, you know what, did underplay what I was expecting to happen when he has a conflict or confronts Jude Law's character. And then, of course, Jude Law, being a Force user, uses the Force to pull the lightsaber from him. Jude Law's character, again, is somebody who is very underdeveloped, where he's a bad guy, which is great, and you can write compelling villains or antagonists that you don't have to make us sympathize with. You can just have somebody be bad and that be compelling enough to watch. Look at the Penguin, who does horrible things, but people are still captivated by, for one, that performance, but also the story that's being presented in front of you. Wim has growth, but it sort of happens off screen, where he starts to be more confident in himself, but his reliance on other people still is abundantly clear. Fern has one real argument with KB about their perspectives and taking other people's opinions to fact and considering them when making decisions. Neil is awesome. He's cute. He's super funny. His character sort of is very family focused and he doesn't want to tip the boat. Very reminiscent of friends you would have in Amblin and 80s movies. But we spend more time with the characters just sort of bickering and bantering that the journey that they go on, it's not overly interesting. The settings for this show are cool, but I feel bad because I don't want to sound like I'm just trashing this show. As I said, probably minutes ago at this point, I like a lot of the ideas that probably got this show made, but with a lot of the Star Wars shows we've had more recently, these things suffer from execution, where concepts are really great, but for whatever reason, we get what I feel like is underbaked storytelling, whether that be unnecessary twists that you have to not tell people, or stories, more specifically with a lot of the Star Wars shows, are afraid to have an opinion, to lean in one direction significantly, and unfortunately, if they do that, they are horribly trashed and trolled by terrible people on the internet. This show, I think, is a victim of a lot of what's been going on with Star Wars, which is a lot of people are just not watching the streaming shows anymore. The viewership numbers for this are even lower than they were for The Acolyte, which doesn't bode well for a season 2. What the story would be for a season 2 is likely just another adventure because of where the show ends. We continue the journey throughout them trying to find the destination of At-Aten. Why is At-Aten hidden from everybody? Well, it turns out it is an Old Republic mint. It's cool to have elements of the Old Republic be a part of this show, but unfortunately, we don't really do anything with it outside of it makes money. The Old Republic is what leads into the Galactic Empire, and that is an interesting story point that's brought up in the finale about the last thing that this place heard about the Jedis was that they had gone bad because of Order 66. But outside of that, we don't really talk about what's going on. At-Aten is an Old Republic setting. Would it have been disconnected from the world leading into what we see from the other shows? With the New Republic founded, wouldn't they want to go out and find these other places? Now, is it also hidden from them? I have no idea. If these episodes were longer, there probably would be a lot more to discuss with the story that's presented in front of me. But similar to a lot of things that want to capture that emotional resonance and feeling of hope and optimism from these coming-of-age stories, you get somebody who is influenced by all of those things, but unfortunately fails to do something with as much depth or originality as those original concepts were when they were presented 40 plus years ago, 50 plus years ago, going to stuff like Star Wars. It reminds me of the conversation I had with Kofi about Aliens, or Alien Romulus, which was fans being fans of this stuff. That can be a really tightrope to walk. John Watts has proven that he is a really great director with things like Cop Car, and I enjoyed Wolfs. It's hard to say that grammatically correctly, but Star Wars feels like it's listless and has no direction at this current standpoint because we're not sure if things are going to continue. So if you're going to be telling a story, is it a complete story? Skeleton Crew does feel more like it is a complete story, as opposed to some of the other things that are going to be incomplete, like The Acolyte, which was canceled because of low numbers. I'm not even going to talk about the viewership response because it was, quite frankly, horrendous. But Skeleton Crew doesn't seem to learn the lessons of the other Star Wars content that was more family-friendly. Clone Wars, when it started, was very family-friendly, more specifically aimed at children. You can argue those first couple seasons are kind of hit and miss, but as that show continued, it was allowed to mature and tell more serious and interesting stories. And with a streaming show like this, I find that especially interesting. I guess I haven't talked about it yet, which is if you're going to be influenced by things that are popular and that work, there was an initial response to the marketing for this, or the pitch, that it was going to be Stranger Things related. I know that Rob and I discussed it earlier in episodes 1 and 2 reactions, and this show doesn't even do those things. And I know Rob mentioned it, which is those episodes are an hour long, and you do put the kids in serious, scary circumstances where with this show, Skeleton Crew, we don't really feel like the kids are in danger. It is Star Wars, so you're not gonna lose one of the kids, but could you lose one of their parents when the pirates eventually do get to Aten? That was a real problem that I did have, which is this show feels way too short. Not just the episode length, but the actual episode-to-episode story. We get to Aten in episode 7, and then episode 8, we get to the vaults and opening them, but then we've got to wrap up the entire show. Oh, there's going to be the New Republic is here, the pirates are here, and Neil's going to shoot an artillery rifle gun, and that was super cool, but all these characters just seem to be in entirely new places from a motivational standpoint. Even Wim's father, who I feel bad, but whoever portrayed his dad is somebody that I feel like was not given great direction, unfortunately. And the relationship with the parents, we see the parents constantly, obviously in duress because their children have disappeared off of the planet, but we didn't get to spend enough time with them together for that loss outside of if you are a parent to really understand how insane their families must be going, what their families must be going through with their kids being anywhere. It is a galaxy far, far away. They literally could be anywhere. And the desperation that they're feeling is not really presented a lot. The world that they live in with Aten being this culture of just sort of following your work, continually making more Old Republic credits. We're not really going to address the outside. That Stepford Wives nature, again, really interesting idea. But this world we're barely on, and they're off in space. That first episode, I believe, is the longest for runtime, but everything needed to be longer, and the story needed to have more depth. At the end of the day, that's my biggest problem with this show, and I wanted to love it. This is not something I went into not wanting to like. This show, it's fine. If you can really, and I don't want to say this as a criticism, but if you're just sort of watching it and letting it wash over you, I could see that working a lot. But unfortunately, this was another example of a lot of the problems I've been having with Star Wars content. And unfortunately, that kind of feels how Disney Plus has been treating it. We know that Marvel, specifically Kevin Feige, has gone, no, we need to slow down production. We're making less projects, and we're going to care more meticulously about what gets out and released. And I would love for that to be the case with Star Wars. So fingers crossed that is what happens. But this for me was not good. It was fine. I got bored at times, and I want to love these kids and see them in another adventure, but I don't know if I want a season 2 of this. I really don't think that. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll feel about it more differently, but having watched this week to week, this is just another Star Wars show that doesn't really nail the mark. So that will do it for my Star Wars Skeleton Crew review. Now let's jump into all of the live action shows and how I would rank them. So for the Star Wars ranking, I thought it would make more sense to rank the shows as a whole as opposed to season by season, because quite frankly, I'm just not going to find that interesting. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different shows. This is S, A, B, C, D, and F ranking. I'm going to go in release order. Star Wars The Mandalorian was a really great Western with a Mandalorian bounty hunter as a first season. The second and third seasons really started to explore the post-Return of the Jedi world. Some of it was a backdoor pilot for some shows that I was interested in, that being the Ahsoka universe. Other stuff was backdoor pilot for the Boba Fett show, and trust me, we'll get there. I like The Mandalorian, but the success of the first season almost feels like a fluke at this point. So I'm going to put The Mandalorian in the rank of B for Disney Star Wars shows. The next is Star Wars: The Book of Boba Fett. I did not like this show. I like Roberto Rodriguez. I think he's made some really interesting films. I would argue he usually makes outlandish children's films that are really hard to take seriously. Don't get me wrong, grew up on Spy Kids, loved those as a child. But his approach to the Book of Boba Fett, particularly with giving him almost an Arrow-like memory factory anytime he was in the Bacta tank, and taking a character who we were so used to being a bad guy, again, Star Wars being afraid to just have straight villains, his redemption arc did not work for me at all. Boba Fett, it's really bad in my opinion, so Book of Boba Fett is a rank of, it's an F. The next is really tough for me. Star Wars Obi-Wan Kenobi, exploring the immediacy of Obi-Wan Kenobi's world after Revenge of the Sith. Right, again, this is such a Star Wars Disney Plus problem. Great idea, a really great idea, but with how thin this story was stretched, again, it introduces a lot of really cool things where we have a Sith Lord or a Inquisitor who is now brought into the Galactic Empire wanting to kill Darth Vader for what he did to the Jedis at the Jedi Temple. It is super interesting, but I feel like Obi-Wan Kenobi would have been so much better served as a feature film, not to mention really getting to get a big budget for something that deserved that. Ewan McGregor is an incredible Obi-Wan Kenobi. Hayden Christensen coming back as Darth Vader. Amazing. That guy didn't deserve the crap he got for the bad writing and bad direction choices of the prequels. Those movies have not been redeemed in my eyes in the 20 plus years since they came out. I'm really struggling with this. There's some stuff I really like about Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then there's some stuff I really didn't. It is like the banner for what has gone wrong, but it still does have a lot of good stuff. I'm going to put Obi-Wan Kenobi in the rank of C, and that hurts doing it. The next one, incredibly easy. Andor is brilliant. Tony Gilroy shows how little he actually cares about the fandom around Star Wars and just wants to tell an incredible political thriller story that just happens to be in a galaxy far, far away. It is politics in Star Wars, and it works so well, ironically, given how politics were attempted to be in the prequels, and they are a significant part of the original trilogy, whether people want to admit it or not. Andor is near perfect. This is the easiest one ever. Andor is an S. It's absolutely incredible. Ahsoka is the next show on the list. And Ahsoka being, I love Star Wars Rebels. Quite, in my opinion, it's my favorite. No, I mean, I know it's my opinion. I'm letting you, the listener, know. Star Wars Ahsoka is a continuation off of Star Wars Rebels. And another thing that could have easily been a cartoon, but as somebody who advocates for the Star Wars animated series, but they don't get seen by legitimacy, or they don't feel like they're legitimate from certain Star Wars fans, which makes absolutely no sense to me. Star Wars Ahsoka is good, and it has some of the elements I love about The Mandalorian, but also some of the problems of Obi-Wan. I'm going to put that in... Oh, this is really tough too. I'm going to put this also in C. And I don't like doing that. I really don't. The next is The Acolyte. The Acolyte is a show that has, I know I've said this so many times in this episode, but some brilliant ideas. And if you structured it in another way and moved things around, there's some amazing characters in it. And it's exploration of a part of the Star Wars world that is almost a recanoning of the Old Republic, or no, what are they calling it now? They have a new name for it, and I can't remember what it is called. The High Republic, that's the new era that they've created. I'm going through the books, and I like this stuff. Master Soul as a compelling lead from Lee Jung Jae. It would have been amazing, but it wasn't. I'm going to put the Acolyte. Oh, man. I'm going to put the Acolyte in. I'm going to put it in D. Unfortunately, I really am. I was really disappointed by the Acolyte. And lastly, Skeleton Crew. I just did a whole review on it. Skeleton Crew has all the makings of something really amazing and a new entry point for young children, but I don't personally feel like it's going to be something that young kids are going to want to revisit because of a lot of unforced errors. And so with that, I'm going to put Skeleton Crew in D as well. So if you want me to run it off really quickly, I will do that again. Starting at the bottom, I have Boba Fett in F. In D, I have the Acolyte and Skeleton Crew. In C, I have Obi-Wan Kenobi, as well as Ahsoka. In B, I have The Mandalorian. And in S, I have Andor. That's my ranking for the Star Wars live action shows. I'd love for you to comment on the podcast episode wherever you may be listening and let me know how you would rank them, because I'm curious what everybody else's reactions to these shows was. Now, let's jump into listener mail and question of the week responses.
Can I ask you a question? Just one?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
Last week's question of the week was, if you had to see any of the characters from Creature Commandos in another project, what would you like to see them in? Dylan, of course, who was in the episode, said, we need an entire Weasel show. I just want to see Weasel frolic and lead a wolf pack. I want to see Weasel try and learn to speak or communicate, and I want to see Weasel slash up more supervillains. Long live Weasel. Dylan, I'm going to assume you're in the minority for that one, but I mean, who knows? I could be wrong. Scotty, I appreciate you so much commenting on YouTube and Spotify, specifically to answer two questions. One, the actual question of the week, but also the Invincible thing. I skimmed your Invincible response, but I felt like there were spoilers in there, and how I've actually not read any of the Invincible comics, and because of that, I want the show to tell me the story. So I really do appreciate you filling me in on things that went over my head, but because I don't want to know, I didn't read it thoroughly. So I really do appreciate that. And anytime something comes up like that and you feel like doing that, go right ahead. Just know it might not get read out loud on the podcast. But your question of the week response. If I had to pick a Creature Commando to get his or her own solo project, it would probably be G.I. Robot, simply because I'm a sucker for a World War II period piece, and I have a fondness for military action stories, so long as they aren't too overly propagandistic and more nuanced instead. Yeah, but... Oh, and then this was another part. Yeah, best not to name social media scoopers on the podcast. I mostly wrote that so Kyle would know who I was talking about and would not read it on the air. Anyways, awesome. Okay. And then Keen Machine writes in, not about Creature Commandos, but a question, which I always appreciate. You don't have to answer the question. You can ask me one anytime. Keen Machine writes, what are some of your favorite DC team-up groups? Not large organizations like the Expanded Justice League, but something smaller, like the Teen Titans or the Injustice Gang, etc., can be heroes or villains. So I have two questions to this. I don't know if this counts. The size of the Young Justice team, I've always really enjoyed. I think that storyline specifically with people who want to be in the Justice League and outside of the Teen Titans, they're not really addressed. I mean, you could argue the Young Justice team is just Teen Titans, but unlike that show, I felt that they approached it from a much more maturity-based standpoint. And if you haven't checked out Young Justice, highly recommend that you do. I have all the comic books as well, which are one of my favorite parts, which is they fill in the actual season-long stories that aired on television. But if you want a smaller group, I really like when it's characters through time travel means. So whether that, or just do a duo as opposed to super large, even if it's 3, 4, or 5. I like Constantine anytime he's with Batman, or honestly, Etrigan the Demon. More of the supernatural stuff's really cool. But then, of course, growing up with the DCAU, I liked anytime Static worked with Batman Beyond, Terry McGinnis. I thought that was absolutely amazing. So those are my answers to that question, Keen. I will keep it keen. Thank you so much for your question. I don't really want to talk about Star Wars, quite frankly. I talked about it enough, but I guess my question would be, out of the live action shows, what is your current favorite Star Wars live action show? Is it something they haven't made yet? Maybe you're super optimistic, or it's something that came out. If you want to be even super specific, you can give a specific season of a show if it's run longer enough. It doesn't necessarily mean what is the best. Your favorite could be something that people would argue isn't the best. You know what? I'm going to scratch that too. What is your favorite Disney plus Star Wars show, period? So let's include the animated stuff because, as I said in Skeleton Crew review, I think they get overlooked quite a bit. So what is your favorite Disney plus Star Wars show? To let me know, you can email me, filmreelistpod@gmail.com. You can comment directly on Spotify or YouTube or on any of the social medias. You can include that with a hashtag QOTW. You can tag me and Film Realist in that to really make sure that I see it. Next week's episode was originally going to be a feature film, but there is a show that came out this past weekend that I was really excited about, and going to be completely honest, I totally should have put on my anticipated list of the year, and it's a total mess up on my end. It wasn't on there because I forgot. But next week's episode will be a review of season 2 of Castlevania Nocturne. I love the Castlevania Netflix universe and Castlevania Nocturne. Please make sure to listen to my first review with my dear buddy Rain. I'm hoping he comes back on for season 2, but life gets in the way sometimes, so he may not be there. He may be there. You're just going to have to listen to next week's episode to find out. My name is Kal Naranya. Please consider giving the podcast a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, or if you are listening on Android, a 5-star review on Spotify. It would help the podcast grow. There's a threshold that I'm trying to reach that would allow me to have new, incredible opportunities for the podcast, which would mean that I could bring new and exciting things to you, the listener. So I hope that I am able to do that in 2025. If not, no worries. You can still look forward to the Film Realist podcast every Monday morning. My name is Kal Naranya. I've said that more than once. I mean, it is my name, but I hope to see you next time.